ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, history buffs, baseball fans. Welcome to this special presentation of the Big Game James Show, presented by ThinkSlinger.org. Ahem. And now, your most handsome, articulate host, a Big Game James.
Thanks, Charles, for that lovely introduction. I'm loving the accent, man. I might have to give you a raise around here, get you to do some more talking, maybe even get you on the show one of these days. Anyhow, folks, today we're talking about baseball and the Civil War. The American pastime saw a lot of growth during and after the Civil War. Prior to the Civil War, it saw some growth in the far northern states of New York and New Jersey, but it was during the Civil War that the game really caught on to the American imagination. You know, the legend is that a Civil War hero, Abner Doubleday, invented the game, but we all pretty much know these days that that story is more than likely a myth. I'm not going to go as far as saying that it is a complete myth, but what I will agree with is it's shaky at best. It's shaky at best. So we're not gonna discuss that today, though. We're talking about the Civil War, baseball, and its growth during the Civil War, and one of its biggest cheerleaders, who happened to be the 16th president of the United States. So what we're getting into is, regardless as to whom invented baseball, the game was well established prior to the Civil War in the New York area, parts of New Jersey, down in Washington, D.C., of course. The President Lincoln, learned and loved the game way before his election campaign in 1860. He played a game called barn ball, which is sort of like a one-man or one-person version of baseball. Toss the ball in the air, hit it, or you toss the ball towards the wall, it comes bouncing back, you hit it with a stick. Almost like street ball or something like that you might have played as a kid. But it's well known that Lincoln was a proponent and a fan of baseball. A popular newspaper at the time even published a political cartoon showing him batting against his opponents during that 1960 campaign. During the Civil War, he even had a baseball field, kind of a baseball field, constructed on the White House lawn. There are stories, such as he was late for a war council meeting and said, "They'll just have to wait. It's almost my turn to bat." And that's a quote. So I suppose the war is going to have to wait so Mr. Lincoln can go hit a few balls, maybe pop a few home runs out, or, do whatever he was doing with his bat and balls at the time. Anyhow, the Civil War did something unique for the game. Rather than minimizing a sport, it actually expanded baseball and set up a scenario that would make the game explode throughout the country and quickly make it a professional business. Remember, just prior to the war, baseball was fairly confined to the New York and her surrounding areas. During the war, there were long periods of encampments, waiting, soldiers were waiting for the next battle. They would drill and drill and drill and become extremely bored, in which low morale would sort of set in with these guys. And, they needed something to kind of pass the time. So the New York regiments started teaching their comrades from Pennsylvania, Michigan, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Ohio, other northern states that were participating in the war. They started teaching them the game of baseball just to simply pass the time. Well, it turns out that many of the soldiers loved it, and, they played it as often as they could. They would often stop drilling sessions just to pick up a game of baseball. Generals actually sent reports saying, or rather instructing, the lieutenants and the drill sergeants to promote baseball activities in their respective camps. It is said that it promotes good health and keeps the mind off of the war. More importantly, it helps morale. It helps keep morale up. It is good if all ranks play together, another report says. Every encampment and most of the companies had their own one-piece baseball pattern, like the ball itself. Like, it depended on which regiment you were in, or rather, how the ball was made depended on what regiment you were in. And if you had, say, a person there that happened to know how to sew. Typically, they would get a walnut. A soldier would fetch a walnut and start wrapping it with yarn until the cut horsehide they would typically use would fit around it in a nice, tight manner. Then they would sew it up and have their baseball for the games. Oak limbs were cut and carved for bats. If your company was lucky, professionally made bats from Cooperstown, New York, were shipped with your supplies. Gloves were not used up until the 20th century. I have a blog, or rather, I have a podcast about that, about baseballs in general and the use of gloves, but mostly about baseballs. If you can look through our archives, it's on there. Or rather, it's in there. So my question, I suppose the most obvious question to me after thinking about this and pondering for a bit is, how did Southern soldiers learn the game of baseball? And it just kind of like hit me like a sack of bricks after watching the movie Andersonville. I'd watched it a long time ago, but I recently watched it again. It's a movie about the horrific prison camp, Civil War prison camp. There was another one called Elmira. These were horrific camps, but these aren't the camps I'm not referring to right now. I'm referring to some of the looser camps in which activity was promoted to the prisoners. Many prisoners actually learned and played the game of baseball. They were taught this to keep them active, so as to they would keep their mind off of other things such as escape or mutiny or trying to kill people, trying to kill the soldiers, whatever. It just kept their mind off of things and kept them preoccupied while the war was going on. It actually became really popular to have games between Northern and Southern teams, and the games were extremely competitive. Baseball was so loved, it even expanded to the battlefront. George Putman, a Union soldier fighting in Texas, wrote home saying, quote, "We were playing baseball near the front lines after a break in our skirmish. Suddenly there was a scattering of fire, which 3 outfielders caught the brunt. The center fielder was hit and captured. The left and right field managed to get back to our lines. The attack was repelled, but we had not only lost our center fielder, but the only ball we had in Alexander, Texas." Whoa. So they were more concerned with losing their ball than losing their center fielder, it sounds like. So the Civil War started and ended in April. So think about this. The traditional, as you know, April's the traditional beginning of the baseball season now. Soldiers on both sides went home and brought baseball with them. The game exploded in communities all over the country, and they were often referred to as the textile leagues. Remember that, the textile leagues. I'm definitely going to be doing a podcast on the textile leagues much later, so it's not really necessary to jump into it right now. But anyhow, the areas had their best and most competitive teams. Each town, each city, etc. We start seeing a professionalization of the game. Baseball was amateur when it first became popular, and it was expected to remain amateur. It was not thought to be, baseball was not thought to be something that people should make money playing. It was viewed as sort of a way to pass the time, as almost like a kid's sport and undeserving of pay. It was not seen as a manly thing to do. So anyhow, in 1869, the game did become professional. After a long series, the reasons are quite complex, very complicating, and we'll get into that in another podcast. I keep saying that, but believe me, that's going to be another podcast. It's deserving in its own, the professionalization of baseball. But anyhow, in 1869, players began to, be paid for their services. And that first team to pay top dollar was the Cincinnati Red Stockings. They won every game in their first year, and it pretty much ticked off every team that they played. So more and more players began demanding demanding money. They wanted to be acquisitioned by a paycheck and not just because they loved the game. So the next year, other teams started paying so that they could also recruit really good players. Even women quickly learned to love the game. A team called the Dolly Vardens. That is, the Dolly Vardens were the first recognized baseball team and first women's African-American team. They were established in 1867, 2 years before the Cincinnati Red Stockings. I always thought that was pretty fantastic. Then there was the Philadelphia Blue Stockings, champions of 1869, even though the Red Stockings were undefeated. But nevertheless, they declared themselves champion, and that went undisputed. Maybe Cincinnati just didn't get the word. Who knows? It's all conjecture to try and figure out, guess why the Blue Stockings were declared champions. Anyhow, the Female Baseball Club of Philadelphia were the first female team to play a male team in the 1880s. It's not known the exact year, but there are records that indicate in the 1880s the Blue Stockings did play against male teams. It seems everyone wanted to play baseball, and it just dawned on me right now as well that perhaps Cincinnati just didn't recognize Philadelphia as champion, or just didn't care because they weren't of the same sex. Could have been problematic in the 1800s, but who knows? I'm not going to go there right now, and I'm going to continue with the Civil War and baseball. So since the Civil War, baseball became, baseball. The teams continued to wrap their walnut yarn and horsehide balls until about 1889, when a machine was finally invented to wrap string around a core. Because of a shortage of horses, a law was actually passed eliminating the use of horsehide, and 2 pieces of cowhide were used in making the ball instead. So you might find it amazing that with all of our great inventions since the Civil War, no one has invented a machine to adequately sew a ball together. I mean, we have these fancy cell phones, high-powered computers, these wonderful microphones that we get to speak into to create radio shows and podcasts. And, we've even got baseball bats made by machine, but we don't have baseballs made, by machine, which is great, because it keeps people employed. But another reason is, all Major League Baseballs are actually hand-sewn in Costa Rica. So while the Civil War made baseball explode, you can probably guess that the same thing might happen again, since the baseball factory producing all of our balls every season is based at the front of an extremely active volcano. Like the Northern Civil War soldiers in Texas, we might lose all of our new balls. It is certain baseball advanced dramatically because of the Civil War, and other than eliminating enslavement, it is quite difficult to think of anything else good that came out of that horrible war. Well, that's all the time I have today, ladies and gentlemen. Be sure to visit us at thinkslinger.org, and remember, question everything and always seek the truth. This has been Big Game James for thinkslinger.org. We'll see you next time on the Big Game James Show.